Hi, my name is Sheila and this is my channel Seaside Snuggles, Quilts, Patterns, and Crafts, where I focus mainly on quilts, but will craft anything that tickles my fancy. What's tickling my fancy today is the Scrappy Arabesque quilt. Finally, I'm doing a tutorial for the pattern that's in the store. I will make sure that I link it in the description down below. For this section, you're going to need 16 fat quarters and about 2 yards of background fabric. For this particular quilt, I've used Tula Pink's Roar and Kona cotton in Gotham Grey. For the quilt that I made before, and the one that's on the cover of the pattern, I used Kaffe Fassett. I don't remember, I'll have to put it down below what the line was, but it's a Kaffe Fassett collection. And I used a shimmering gold for the background fabric. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I will be putting the link to the pattern in the description below. I'm going to talk about the measurements, so you can get the measurements from watching the video, but I'm not going to put the measurements in the description. Girls got to make a living. But I hope you'll join me. It's easier than it looks, and I would love to see the quilts that you make, so let's get started. I'm starting with 4 fat quarters here. I just have them layered up and pinned together. I've already cut 2 straight edges to zero myself, and now I'm just arranging my fat quarters so that I can get a 10-inch section parallel to the 18-inch side. That way I can get 2 10-inch sections from one fat quarter. From there, I'm going to get my 9.5-inch ruler, and I'm going to start cutting the pieces on my half fat quarter on page 7. You'll find this diagram, and I'm starting with a 9.5-inch square. The ruler that I'm using is a 9.5-inch ruler, so and there we go. And that's half the quilt top right there, the 9.5-inch squares. The next thing I'm going to cut here should be a 2-inch strip, but I accidentally cut a 2.5-inch strip. I have enough on this half fat quarter to make some mistakes, so it works out anyway. But imagine that's a 2-inch wide width cut in half so that you have 2 5-inch sections. Then I'm cutting a 6 by 6-inch square, and I'm going to cut that 6 by 6-inch square diagonally each way. If you're using directional fabric, make sure that you keep your tops separate from your bottoms, separate from your left, from your right with these triangles, because it's going to make a difference in your motif if it matters to you. So I'm just trying to keep those things pinned so that they're all the right sides are together, all the left sides are together. And my last cuts here, I have a 4-inch width. I'm going to cut into 5 and then cut it in half so that I have 2 vertical rectangles that are 2 by 4. I'm going to go back and adjust those first rectangles that I made that were horizontal so that they are also 2 by 5, 2 inches by 5 inches. So all of my cuts are one 9.5-inch square, a 6-inch square cut into 4 triangles, 2 vertical 2-inch by 5-inch rectangles, and 2 horizontal 2-inch by 5-inch rectangles. So I'm laying them out into the motif so you can see how these will be used. And you see those triangles are going to have a definite position if you're using directional fabric. So you'll get 2 of those stacks out of each fat quarter. Now I'm going to cut some background pieces, and this diagram is on page 8. And when I'm referring to the pages, it's version 2 of the pattern. If you don't have version 2, you should be able to download it from Etsy. If you have a problem, just shoot me an email with your order number and an email address, and I will email you the version 2 directly if you've already purchased it. If you purchase it now, you'll get version 2. All right, so I just zeroed my edge there, and I'm going to start cutting sections for E, F, and G. I've got a little piece of tape there on 2 inches. That's the width of my E and F sections. And I like to cut at least 2 strips at a time. And here I'm cutting my G and H widths, which is 1 5/8 inch. I could have moved my tape there to cut a little faster, but it worked out fine. And I'm cutting out 4 of those there because the H pieces are pretty long. So I like to layer my pieces. I leave them folded so the selvage is on my right, and then I stack 2 pieces so I have 4 layers. And here I'm cutting some 5-inch sections for G. Those are going to be sewed onto my triangles. And each stack is a stack of 4. And I need 2 per block. So that's first cut was enough for 2 blocks, then 4 blocks, so on and so forth. Now for each block, I'm also going to need 1 H, and I have 4 layers here, so I've cut 1 length of H, and so that stack there is enough for me to do 4 blocks. Now for my 2-inch strip, I'm cutting E and F by cutting a 4-inch section first, and then dividing that section by either cutting 1 1/4 inch off, which is E, or cutting 2 inches off, which is F. And then I have both pieces from that 4-inch section that I'm going to need. And each stack is for 1 block. So all these pieces that I'm cutting here are going to be enough for 4 blocks total. And that's kind of how I break up my cutting. Just however many I can get out of a strip. And my extra pieces I set aside for, in case I can use them later. Now here I've got my horizontal rectangles, and I'm going to pair my piece F, background piece F, with the horizontal rectangles. Pieces E, and I'm just dividing it in half there. Pieces E are my vertical rectangles, and I'm going to pair those with section E. Okay, so I have 2 short on the vertical rectangles in relation to my print, and the larger E sections in relation to my print go with the horizontal. Then I'm taking my top and bottom triangles and pairing those with my parts G. So now I'm just going to sew all of those on. With the triangles, you want to make sure that you are sewing them all the same way. So I am lining up the 90-degree angle of my triangle and placing that on top of my background strip. So these are all being sewn the exact same way. It's very important, because you want that background piece to be in the same position on all of these triangles. So these are my bottom pieces. And they're sewn on the same as the top pieces, but I do still want to keep them in separate piles. So here I have all of my vertical rectangles, and I'm just pairing them up with like fabrics. You don't need to do this. It depends on how you want to stay organized. You do need to stay organized, but there's a couple ways to do it. What I'm doing here is I'm pressing all of the seams towards the feature fabric, or away from background fabric. I just spritzed it with a little water, and now I'm just hand pressing those seam allowances towards center, and then I'll give them all a little bit of heat. So these are all of my horizontal rectangles, so they'll be at the top and bottoms of my motifs. And doing them in batches like this kind of helps to break up the monotony of it. So it looks like I had maybe five fat quarters in that pile. All right, so my little pieces with the short ends are my side pieces, left and right. And I'm going to do the same thing here. All the seam allowances are going to be pressed to center. And then I'm just going to pile them with the top and bottom ones that match. Organization is key. You can either organize by keeping all of your fabrics that are the same together, all the pieces, or you can keep all of the pieces together. So all of the side pieces, all of the top pieces, all of the bottom pieces, all of the top triangles, all the bottom triangles, so on and so forth. So now that we're to the triangles, it's going to get a little more complicated. I've got 2 and 2. If this was directional fabric, I would definitely have a top and a bottom. And 2 of these are going to go, now relation to the motif, the 2 top are going to have the seam allowances pressed toward the background, and the 2 bottom are going to be pressed towards the top. Let me confirm that real quick. Yes, that's correct. On page 11, at the bottom, step 5 shows which direction the background pieces should be pressed. So the top should be pressed towards the background, and the bottom should be pressed away from the background when we're talking about the motif. Okay, it's going to switch up when we talk about the piece blocks, but when we're talking about the motif, I'll say it one more time. The top triangle has the seam allowance pressed towards the background, and the bottom triangle has the seam allowance pressed away from the background. So half of my triangles here are towards the background and half are away from the background. And I just stack them and iron them all together. So that was page 11. And here again, I'm stacking them with their like fabrics. I would say that it might be easier just to keep your triangles together, keep all of your top triangles together, all your bottom triangles together for the laying out, if you have a board to put them on. If you're going to try to piece it, a little bit of time because you don't have a big space to lay everything out, then definitely group by fabric. So here's the layout again, now with the background pieces sewn on. So we've had our horizontal pieces on, our vertical rectangles on. Our triangles that don't have anything sewn on are placed at the left and the right. The triangle with the seam allowance away from the background is on the bottom, and the triangle with seam allowance towards the background is at the top. So we'll get all these done and then we'll go to the board. So I will see you there. Hi. So as you can see, I have my large blocks laid out on the design wall. And if you have the pattern, we are on page 12. And I have, I think I have all of my pieces sewn. So I have all of my triangles sewn, all of my rectangles sewn with both the long background pieces and the short background pieces. So as I stated, it would behoove you to keep everything organized. There's 2 ways that you can organize it. One would be by fabric color, and one would be by fabric piece. So all of your top and bottom triangles together, all of your left and right triangles together, all of your top and bottom rectangles together, and all your left and right rectangles together. I have it sorted both ways, and I'm going to show you how I put them up on the board. In the pattern, I have you putting up your big squares like this and organizing them in a way that you think is aesthetically pleasing. And you should try to get as close as possible to your final layout at this stage, because you're going to have 4 more pieces per motif to move if you decide to move things around after the fact. So I'm going to try to stay as close to this as possible, just to avoid some work with organizing it later. Also, you are going to be setting up your blocks to be sewn in the next section with this section. I have in the instructions for you to put your side pieces up first that match the square. I'm going to put my top and bottom pieces up. You can put the side pieces up first or the top and bottom, it doesn't matter. The only reason I'm changing it is those pieces are larger, the top and bottom pieces, and I think that'll be easier for you to follow. So if you don't have a huge wall to put your quilt up on, then you can go sort of row by row. You're going to have to start with the first 3 rows so that you can build this block, this block, this block, this block, and this block. This block, you'll need to know how you end up on that end to finish. Any of your edge blocks are going to have to be finished with another edge, with an edge triangle. So those are going to be a little bit harder to finish without it being laid out, but if you know what you want to put in the top right corner, and if you know what you want to put on the first one in the second row, and the third one in the, or the first one in the third row, then you'll be able to complete all of your interior blocks. Now, that probably doesn't make any sense right now, but I'm about to show you as we lay these pieces out. So I don't know if I'm going to talk a lot while I'm laying them out, because I think I'm going to want to fast forward it, but let's get started and it'll make more sense. So I'm going to start with my large top and bottom pieces. And when I cut them, remember, I kept the fabric oriented so that the top of the fabric was horizontal, I guess. You'll see. So I have my rectangles sorted in 2 different ways. These I have by block, and these I just have the large ones. So I'm going to start by laying out my large ones that aren't in sets first, and I'm going to go, when we lay these out, we're going to lay them out by the motif, okay, not by the block. The motif is going to be matching fabrics. So in this case, I have this green polka dots on teal, which is down at the bottom. So I am going to take one of these and put it on top. Now this teal is at the bottom of my quilt, so I'm just going to set the second one, which would be on the bottom, aside for a moment. The next one I have is this one here, or this one here, because remember, we have 2 motifs per block if we use both halves of the fat quarter. So for that teal one, I only used 1. For this one, I'm using 2, and I'm just going to place it so that the pattern is upright, or what I think is upright. I'm going to put this one here, and I've got 4 of these because I did both sets. And I want to look at the rest of my block and see if, you know, I like the way those look together, if I need to rotate them around, swap them, whatever. But I like the way it is. Also, each of these blocks that have a specific direction I made sure to put on the board upright. So this is upright, this is upright, this is upright. It's going to make a difference, or it may affect how you lay out everything else. So, and you want to sew it correctly when you put it in your quilts. So just go ahead and lay everything out right side up if you have directional fabric. All right, so these are my next ones. I know I only have one of these, so I'm going to put this at the top and the bottom. Okay, this looks like it belongs to my Tyrannosaurus Rex, and I have that in two places. There's the other one. So I'm going to put one here. One here. You can see where this is going, so I decided to just speed it up. This is 3 times speed, and I've switched to a different grouping method. So you can see I'm putting up some of my side pieces along with the top and bottom pieces. And as I put them up, you can see how the layout is starting to fill in until we get enough sections to do the outside of our piece blocks. They'll each have the top, bottom, left, and right section. And then we will start laying out our triangles. So pretty cool how it comes together from just a bunch of squares in a checkerboard. So let's keep it moving. Okay, so you can kind of see we've now built the outside of our secondary blocks. The next thing we need to do is the inside of our secondary blocks. And I'm going to start with the triangles that we did not sew anything to. So our triangles that we didn't sew anything to should be our side triangles. So they're going to go to the left and right side of our matching fabrics. So in this case, I have the pieces for this block, which is also here. And the way that mine are distinguished is the direction the pin is. So I put my pins in with my right hand, so the ball is on the right hand side. So I know that this one points to the left. This one is going to point to the right because the ball of my pin is, I'm right-handed, and the arrow points the way it's going to be. So where the head of the pin is tells me the orientation of this particular triangle. Once I have the orientation, I know what side it goes on because it's going to point in the direction that it goes. Does that make sense? All right, let's lay these out. So these are going to go on the left-hand side. My head is on the right because I'm right-handed. It's pointing to the left. So I'm going to put these left-hand points on first. So that's going to go there. And this left-hand one as well. This goes with my Triceratops, so I've got one up there. I'm going to set it aside. And I have the Triceratops over here as well, on the left. And these go with my blue Triceratops on the left. These go to the right side. So this one is going to go to the right side of this Tyrannosaurus Rex. This one is going to go to the right side of this Tyrannosaurus Rex. Let me pull this down a little bit. And the triangle there. All right, let's put some more up. So my pin head is on the right it's pointing to the right. So this side's for my right side, this for my left side. Let's start with the left side. So you see the way it's going. I'm filling in all of the left and right triangles. I will complete that and then we'll move on to the pieces, our tops and our bottoms. I have all the sides on that I want to put on right now. The only ones that are missing are the edge pieces, right? And the where I can't reach. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the pieces that are at the top of the motif. Okay, so the pieces that are at the top of the motif are going to be, let's check the instructions. Place the top seam pressed towards the background and bottom seam pressed away from the background triangles with their matching fabrics. So let's start with this. So we have our seam allowances pressed towards the background. We have 2 of those. And we have 2 with the seam allowances pressed away from the background. So the ones that have the seam allowance pressed towards the background, yes, which are these, are going to go at the top of the motif. So this one's hard to reach. Let's see if I can get it up there. Top of the motif. Top of the motif. And the ones that are pressed away are going to go at the bottom of the motif. So at this point, I don't have a whole lot of sticky area on my design wall, so they may have a little difficulty staying up there. If they do, tuck them up under the piece above it, but it looks like it's doing okay. T towards at the T top, if that helps you to remember. Away at the bottom. So my towards at the top, my away is at the bottom. Towards at the top, away at the bottom. So my other stacks, I just have all my towards in a stack and I have all of my away in a stack. And I think those will be a little better. I still have them sorted by fabric, but I think you'll see that it's easier for me to get them on the board when they're organized that way. So let's do the rest. Okay, so those are all of my top pieces on now. Now to put all my bottom pieces on my bottom triangles, which is the bottom relative to its matching fabric or the motif. And these are pressed away from the background. Here. Whew, I'm so glad the heat just kicked on. I'm sorry if you can hear it, but I am pretty cold. This is a bottom. And see how the top of the fabric, this is going to go on the bottom, but the direction of the fabric matches because we've kept these organized. So yeah, this one here is upside down. You may have to swap it out. So if you find something like this, take the time to take these back to the iron. Say your top and bottom are opposite of what you want them to be, and press the seam allowances in the opposite direction so that it matches all of the other blocks. That will help you a great deal to keep yourself oriented as you're putting these blocks together. So I'm just going to press them in the opposite directions from what they are. Now, aside from that, we have all of these empty spaces around the outside of our, I'm missing a top and bottom for that as well. So this as well, I need bottom. No, I took it off. I just took it off. Okay, so aside from that, we have all the outside that needs to be filled in, and that's where all the pieces that we've set aside are going to come into play to complete all of the blocks around the outside edges. So depending on the size of the quilt that you're making and how many blocks you're using, will determine how you place these extra pieces. So in this case, we have 4 motifs across, and it begins and ends on a full block, right? If I began on a full block and then end up on a piece block, I could just carry around to the other side of the row. In this case, if it began and ended on opposite blocks vertically, I could just carry it from the bottom of the column to the top of the column. This particular quilt in this size ends with matching types of blocks, so we're going to have to move our extra pieces up one or down one. And here's what I mean. So let's look at this block first. This block has a short rectangle and a left triangle that need to be added to the quilt. I can't just put it at the end here because I don't have a block to put it in, but I can put it below or above. So let's see if I can find those pieces. So here are the side and the left piece that would have gone with that block. I'm gonna put it on this edge, but I can put it anywhere I want to. So I'm just gonna look at where it would fit best. I don't necessarily have to put it one above or one below, but I do need to put it on the opposite side. So I'm just gonna put it here. If you can see this, I think, maybe right here. I think it'll look good right here. So that's where these 2 pieces are going to go, and that will complete this block. Okay? Let's look at this side. So we have a green that we need the right side and the right triangle for. Okay? So these 2 pieces would go with that motif, but I'm just going to bring it over here, and I think I'm going to put it here at the top to add some contrast. So does that make sense? But because the pieces have specific left, right, top, bottom locations, you have to swap them to left, right, top, bottom, so that your finished blocks will make sense. So because I have this, when I took my extra pieces and set them aside, I kept them in their groups. So I'm going to take all my pieces of short fabric and I'm going to fill in my short rectangles. I'm going to fill in the left and right accordingly. I can put them wherever I want, but I want to make sure that I'm trying to put them on the opposite side. So this one, I don't want to put this right next to a matching piece of fabric, even though I have a piece there. So I'm going to put this piece down here. I've got this pink that's going to be from that side, and I think I'll put that one right here. I think I'm going to swap this and put this here, maybe, and put that there. Yeah, we'll put that there. And I have my purple that's left from the opposite side. I'll put right here. I'm gonna have a couple extra because I have 5 solid blocks to be finished, but only 4 spaces to fill in. So I'm actually gonna have 2 colors that are gonna be extra that I might swap out with something else if the colors are too similar or the pattern's too similar and I don't like it. I might swap those around. So I'm gonna have a couple extra. Now that I put those side rectangles on, let's put our side triangles on. Okay, so these are the triangles that I have. They should match the rectangles that I already put up. So here is my rectangle that I put up, and here's the triangle that will go with it. And this dark diamonds, oh goodness, I'll put right there. So I've matched those to the triangles. Okay, now I can work the top and bottom, but I need to separate the pieces that, well, sort of. I know that I can go ahead and take the top large rectangles from the top and put them on the bottom. I'll need to separate the large rectangles that would go on, that match the bottom pieces, so that I can put them at the top. So this piece would go with that, which means I can use it on the bottom, and I'm going to put that here. All right, that's all the large rectangles I need on the bottom, and now I just need to put the bottom triangle. Let's back up. It's going to be the top triangle for the motif. So the top triangles for each motif has the seam allowance pressed toward the background. Toward the background at the top. We're just taking it from the top of the motif and putting it in the bottom of the quilt. Once I get them all up, we'll talk about how to build our blocks. I know it's a lot, but you can see how it's coming together and how keeping things organized will help you to lay everything out and build your block. Now, there's one more piece that goes on here, but we're going to sew our triangles together first, and then we will add our cross beam, our cross leg of this X after we sew the sides together. You got this. I know it sounds complicated, but once you get everything laid out, your blocks are ready to be sewn. And it's just a matter of keeping things in order, so that, because every block is different, What we've done here by putting all of the triangles with the seam allowance in one direction at the top of the block we're building will help us to get these blocks oriented in the correct position back on the wall after they're sewn together. That's it. So the reason I want to get everything sewn on and put on the wall before I start sewing this together is because after everything is up on the wall, I'm going to take a moment and just look at it and make sure that everything's where I want it to be. Because one, if I don't want like this fabric here, it's going to affect 4 blocks, and it's way easier to fix it now than to fix it later. All right, so I will be back to talk to you after I get everything else back up on the wall. Okay, so all of my blocks are on the board and all of their components. Just looking around. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it the way it is. So this is going to be my layout. The next thing I need to do is I need to start taking components off of the board and pinning them together in their appropriate blocks. I like to do this piecemeal, like a row at a time, and then put it back on the board to keep myself organized. You can do it however you like. I do recommend doing, if you don't do a row at a time, at least stay with the same pairs, and we're about to pair up our blocks. So like the way this is organized is that all of your top pieces according to the motif are in the same location in their pieced blocks. All of the bottom pieces are in the same location in their pieced blocks. This will help you a lot to stay organized. So I highly recommend, if you are making this quilt for the first time, that you keep your organization the way I'm going to do it. If you make the quilt again another time, then do it however works best for you, but it's very easy to get things confused in this quilt. So I'm going to start by taking the bottom left triangles and pairing them up. All the way across the row, and I'm flipping it over so that the edge that I need to sew, which is going to be on the opposite side of the background piece, is together. So I'm just flipping it over like so. Let's see this one. Like so. All right, so those are all of my bottom left pairs. Now I'm going to take the top right pairs. And I'm going to put those together so they're ready to be sewn. You can do more than one row, but I recommend just doing one row, at least initially, just so that you can kind of get it in your brain what's happening here. All right, so I've removed the center of all of the piece blocks on the second row. I'm going to take these to the machine and we're going to sew them together. So I'll see you at the machine. These are the components for one block that I've pulled from the design wall. Everything is here except for the cross long leg of the X, and we'll be sewing that in as we put this block together. But we're going to start with doing the two triangle halves that are in the center of the block, and I just pick the pieces up and line them up so that the stitching edge is on the right hand side. That way I can pick up a lot of them and take them at once to the machine. Also, I tried to keep my left and right side and top and bottom side in order. So all of them are going to be sewn the same way, whether or not the seam allowance is pressed towards the background or away from the background. And here I'm sewing the whole row, all of the triangle halves. Then I'm going to take them apart and we're going to press these in a very specific way. So I'm going to separate them so that the pieces that have the seam allowances pressed toward the background are together, and the pieces that have the seam allowances pressed away from the background are together. Then I just give it a little spritz of water, and whichever way the first seam is, I also press the other seam allowance in the opposite direction, actually. But the way I think about it is, if the first side is pressed towards the background, then I press the second side towards the background. If the first side is pressed away from the background, then I press the second side away from the background. Once I have all those triangle halves done, then I'm going to start folding my long leg of the X in half so that I find center. And then I like to work with the side with the seam allowances pressed away from the background. And I'm matching up the seams and folding those in half as well to find center. Then I line up the center with that long leg of the X and give it a pin. Now, when you sew these triangles together, they're not always going to form a straight line. Like, you want them to form a straight line that lines up with your stitch line on the long leg of the X, but they're not always going to do that. The most important thing is that the first background piece is perpendicular to the second background piece. So you want a 90-degree angle and then kind of wiggle the triangle ends so that it fits as best you can. Remember that you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance to work with, so as long as you're catching about 1/8 of the seam allowance, then you're all right. So after I get all of those cross long legs on the X's sewn, I'm going to take those halves of the triangle and I'm going to press it with the seam allowance on all of them towards the long background piece. Now here's where a little magic is going to happen. I do need to determine which part of the triangle goes with each section. And because we've done one row, we can kind of line those top triangles up and then they'll inform us to where the bottom triangles go. See how they match in the diamonds there? So once we have the correct pieces matched up together, we're going to line up the seam allowance from the second half of the square to the bottom half of the square. And let me just pause for a moment. I'll pause on the next one. But basically, you want to line up, you're forming a channel with the seam allowances that are pressed outward, and you want to line up the seam allowances that are pressed inward inside that channel and then pin right next to the long leg of the X. That will give you a nice continuous line across the center of the block without anything being off. So you want to use those seam allowances to line up one side with the other across the long leg of the X. I hope you can see what I'm talking about here. I do have it sped up a little bit, but you're getting to see it 4 times, so I didn't want to burn too much of your time. But I'm just lining up. I can feel where those seam allowances are nested within the seam allowances of the bottom. Then I want to pin right next to that long leg of the X. Give it a couple more pins to keep it straight, and then I can take all of these to the sewing machine and sew those up. And each row actually goes pretty quickly. I mean, I know I'm in double speed, but each row goes pretty quickly. So once we have those sewn, we're also going to press those seam allowances toward the background piece in the center. So I'm just going to give it a little spritz of water. I'll finger press all the seam allowances in the right direction, and then I'll give them some heat. So all the seam allowances for the background pieces, when you're placing the final piece, go towards center. So you'll have one pair of seam allowances that go away from center on each block, and that is going to be the top right of all of your blocks. If you follow the pressing instructions, that seam allowance that's pressed out, that's at the top right now, that's going to be the top right of each block, and that will help you a ton when you go to put these things back up on the board and are trying to get them in the correct location. So now we need to trim these up. See how you have a little extra hanging off of each of the legs? That's so that you can have a full point. And we're going to use this template to tape off our ruler so that we can form a jig, and it will make the cutting much easier. Of course, you don't have to do this, but I promise you it'll make your life much easier if you do that when you're cutting all these blocks. I'm using a 6.5 inch ruler here, which is the size of the block, but if you have a bigger ruler, you're just going to use those 2 pieces of tape on the left and bottom to kind of border the 6.5 inch mark, so that you can get your your blocks lined up, even on a bigger ruler. So I want to put the number 1, so the 1 inch is in the top right, but my ruler is upside down right now. So the print side is face down because I want to put the tape on the underside of the ruler. This tape here, it's just masking tape. I stick like 4 layers of masking tape on top of one another, and then I cut 1/4 inch strips from that masking tape, and that's what I use to make my jigs. It gives it, the reason you stack that, oh my gosh, the reason you stack the masking tape is so it will give you a little lip, and that little lip gives a place for your seam allowances to kind of stick, so that you can get things aligned using your seam allowances in conjunction with these pieces of tape on the bottom side of your ruler. And I'm trying not to get tape off of where the lines are, because those are where your fabric pieces are going to be, and that's how you're going to get those channels that form the X lined up underneath your ruler. So there's my last piece there, and I recycle these. I just stick them up on the wall next to me, and then I'll use them over and over again. You don't have to have the whole thing taped, but don't have anything extra taped. I hope that makes sense. I did decide to go ahead and extend the line on that short piece I have there. Once I get all of my pieces of tape on there, I'm just going to flip it over right side up and trim away any excess that's hanging off the edges. And now my jig is ready to cut all of the center of my piece blocks. So I like to put that top right corner in the top right. Notice how I kind of jiggled the ruler there? That's how I know that I'm in the right place. Then don't those look great? After you cut all the way around, it really, when you square up a block, it always looks like 10 times better to me. But see how, again, this is double speed, but it's so much faster than trying to find center on each of those legs every time that you put a block under there to square up. See how I just jiggle around? Sometimes your legs aren't going to fit perfectly, so you want to find the best fit that's centered, and even if they don't fit perfectly, it's still so much faster than trying to find center every time. So give the jig a try. Make sure that you're printing it to scale. There is a 1-inch scale block on that page, so it should be at 100% or to scale. Do not print that where it's fit to page. So now we have all of them, the centers done on the rows. We're going to put the left and right pieces on. And I just lined them up so I could see left to right. And the way I know what top is, the way I know what the top is where that open seamed leg is. That is the top right of each block. That helps you get things oriented correctly. So I'm just taking the left sides off, and when I put the right sides on, I need to pin so that the legs meet up with the background piece on the rectangle. So I'm using the 2-pin method. And I confess, I started doing this for accuracy, and then I got tired and I started just using the hope and sew method. If you watched Donna Jordan's videos, may she rest in peace, she taught me the hope and sew method, and you get almost as good a result as if you do this 2-pin method. So if you don't want to do the 2-pin method here, try the hope and sew method. Just make sure that the blocks are centered. You can kind of feel where those seam allowances are going to cross to see if you're in the ballpark. And then, just know you may have to rip some seams if they're not correct, but you may have to rip them anyway. So there you go. You don't have to do this 2-pin method. I don't do the 2-pin method for the entire quilt, and it worked out fine. So you could see there, I'm just like, yeah, let's just put it on here and let the chips fall where they may. And see, I'm just feeling where those seam allowances are going to cross. And they turned out okay. I think I just had one that was really wonky that I had to rip and redo. So I didn't record the first time sewing it, but you'll see where I sew it on after I make the correction. And I do check them before I press them, just in case they're not, I don't want to press a seam into it that's wrong. And these are pressed away from the center. So yeah, this one I wasn't happy with. So I just went ahead and ripped that seam and repositioned it and resewed it. And some of them are just going to be that way. Okay, too easy. So we're going to sew the tops and bottoms on just the same way we did the left and the right sides. They just have longer extensions on the end. And we want to give all these a check. And then if they're good, we'll give them a press. And look at how great they look. So just be patient with yourself. That bowing in the center of each round it's kind of normal. I have the fabrics have a little bit different weight from one another, and I ended up with a little bowing, but we're going to square it up. These are going to square up to 9.5 inches. Oh, and look, I got a rotating mat, and you know what? I don't use it. I had got it, and I was like, this is going to be great when I make this quilt, and I just reverted to my old ways. So I do have it, and maybe I'll take some time to love it later, but for this quilt, I felt like it wasn't really making that big of a difference for me. But once these all get squared up, they look great. You want to make sure that those cornerstones that we have there, those should be at 2.5 inches in. So each one should be at 2.5 inches in. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. I'm not just, I don't know how I want to say it, arbitrarily squaring it up. I am looking at those squares in each corner, and they should be 2.5 inches big from the edge. So I want to make sure that that's squared up as best as I can get it before I cut off any edges. See how nice they look? So here I am sewing my rows together. I went and got the solid pieces off the board that go in between. I'm making sure that I'm keeping them in the correct orientation. So top is the top. The top of the block, remember, has that one leg with the seam allowances open. And so when I have a directional fabric that goes in between, I want to make sure the top of that fabric is aligned with those open legs. In this case, I had, dinosaur faces that I fussy cut, and that's how I kept everything upright. See that open leg at the top? If you, in your quilt, you move the side pieces from one end to the other end, when you're sewing the rows together, make sure that you designate which block is actually the first block, or you may just sew, you know, two blocks together that are actually on opposite ends of the quilt. So make sure that you know which block is actually the first block. And that's how you sew the rows together. Pretty cool, right? So all of these seam allowances are being pressed towards the large block, not the piece block. So away from the piece block towards the single piece block. And then those are alternated from row to row. So those rows will nest as well. And I'm just putting a pin in where those rows nest between solid blocks and piece blocks. So here I'm sewing the first row to the second row. I put a pin in right at the intersection to keep that aligned, and then I put a stabilizing pin in between so that my fabrics don't get like stretched out of whack there, but I keep them out of the path of my presser foot so that I don't have to worry about taking them out. So the only pins that are in the line of my presser foot are the pieces that are actually holding those seams together where they nest. All right, so let's go sew these two rows together. I do back tack. I do that on my last rows, though I should do it on my top and bottom row as well. But when I am doing my final piecing, I like to back tack, even though in reality it's only doing half the job. I sew pairs of rows together, and then I sew those pairs to each other, and so on and so forth. I have an odd number of rows in this quilt, so one row is going to get 3 and then be paired up with 2, and then 4 will be paired up with 5. So this is adding 3 and 4 to 1 and 2. And it's all the same way. It's pretty straightforward from this point. I pin it the exact same way each time I pair them up. I pair the intersections where they nest, and then I put some stabilizing pins in away from the path of my presser foot in between. I really love this quilt design. Like, I want to make it in so many different patterns. This is actually my second design that uses this technique, and I will be doing the other design, a video for the other design, which I call Moroccan tiles. I don't have that in the store yet though, but it's basically similar to this design but with more narrow rows or columns, more narrow columns. All right. So I just wanted to do one little check-in before I finish up the blocks. These are all sewn together, so I have 4 columns, 4 rows sewn together so far. These are what the rows look like individually. So you'll have one that starts with a solid, then has a piece block, alternated with a piece block, and then a solid. These are all pressed towards the solid blocks, so they will nest from row to row as you put these together. And this is what each individual block looks like and how the layout works once you have them sewn together. So again, I'm going to emphasize it's so important that you keep everything organized so that you end up with the fabrics in the correct place, because each one of these piece blocks are different. They're individual. Where confusion happens is where you have blocks where you have two of the same fabric on individual blocks. Sometimes that gets confusing. That's why it's best to keep to work in rows. That way you won't get this confused that often and get things turned around. Also, keeping that seam allowance as directed so that the open seam is in the top right corner of all of these blocks, and that helps me to keep my orientation correct. So if you look at the back of these blocks, I'm going to rotate them. So it's going to be on the top left when I flip these over. And try not to fall down the stairs. That would be bad. So I'm just flipping them over and you see that they're all in the same place. You can easily see that corner with the open seam, especially with this color. Okay, so you can see all of these are in the same location. That's part of what helps me to stay organized and keep the quilt put together. As soon as I get, enough pieces put together, then I sew the rows. When I get enough rows sewed together, I sew in pairs. This one I'll sew in pairs. I'll sew this, then I'll add the third one on. I'll have 5 on the bottom and 4 rows on the top. I'm going to finish this up and I will show you how much I have in the way of scraps. And that will conclude this video once I get it all together and show you the finished center. And then I'll do another video when I do the border. I think I'm going to do the same border that's in the pattern just because I'm showing the pattern, but you can do whatever pattern you want for the border. You can keep it simple if you want to, because the center is beautiful enough. Or you could do no border, just make it bigger and go edge to edge with this design. So if you have any questions, I'm not going to wrap this up just yet. We'll do a final result when I get this all sewn up. But if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you have already purchased this pattern, thank you so much. I'm definitely going to make this pattern again in a different selection of fabrics. Let me know if you want to see it again in different fabrics or if it's too redundant. And if you want to show me yours, I would love to see them. You can post them to my Facebook page, I think, maybe in the community tab. I'm trying to really understand how everything works there. I prefer that you post them to the community tab if you can, so that everybody can see them who watches the video. And we can all give you praise. All right, so I will come back and show you the center when I have all the rows sewn together and my last block sewn up, and we'll call it a wrap. So, and maybe I'll put some makeup on. I don't like quilting in makeup because I am a face toucher and I don't want to get makeup on the quilt. So maybe I'll put some makeup on for the closer. So see you soon. So that's it, my lovelies. The Scrappy Arabesque quilt. I hope you'll give it a try. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll reward me with a like and a subscription. I do recommend that you select the notification bell because I don't post videos regularly. I post them when I get projects to a point where I feel like I should post the video. So they're kind of random. I'm very happy with this quilt. I love this fabric so much. This is a quilt for another niece. The other quilt was for my niece Isabella, and this one is going to be for my niece Aubrey because she loves dinosaurs, and I just think it's lovely. So I hope you like it too. If you try it, please post your pictures and tag me at Seaside Snuggles QPC for Quilts, Patterns, and Crafts on Instagram, or you can find me on Facebook and send me stuff there. Like I love it. Makes my day to see what you've made with my patterns. Like it makes me so happy. You could ask my husband. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you'll join me in the next video which will have the borders. And you're going to see me in this attire for several intros and outros because I have some catching up to do. But thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. See you soon.